You were told you were free, free to choose, free to speak, free to be whoever you wanted. It's the story we've inherited, not just from politics, but from culture, psychology, even spirituality. Freedom became the ultimate virtue, the marker of a meaningful life. But here's the question no one wants to ask. If we're so free, why are we so afraid? Why are we so unsure, so restless? Not from being trapped, but from the endless pressure to make the right choice. Why does this freedom so often feel like anxiety in disguise? Erich Fromm warned us, when freedom is divorced from connection, meaning, and responsibility, it doesn't liberate us. It paralyzes us. He called it escape. Because when we break free from tradition, from community, from certainty, we don't always rise into wholeness. Sometimes we collapse into confusion, and so we reach for systems to follow, for validation to cling to, for anything that will tell us we're doing it right. We call this autonomy. But it's not freedom if every choice feels like a test. It's not freedom if you live in fear of making the wrong move. This is the deception. We haven't escaped control. We've just internalized it. A freedom that demands you prove yourself constantly isn't freedom. It's a performance. So if you've been feeling lost, unanchored, uncertain, it's not because you're weak. It's because you've been handed a version of freedom that asks you to build a self from scratch, without ever telling you who you are. And maybe now you're starting to remember, you were never supposed to do this alone. They say you're free, free to choose where to live, what to believe, who to become. But the truth is more complicated. Because even without commands, you're still being shaped, not by orders, but by expectations, not by chains, but by norms, by the quiet pressure to succeed, to be happy, to be yourself, even if no one ever tells you what that really means. This is the modern paradox. We no longer live under rigid authority, but we still live under pressure. The rules are softer now, but they're everywhere. And when you step outside them, that freedom starts to feel less like a gift and more like a burden. Erich Fromm warned that freedom, once disconnected from purpose, stops being liberating. It becomes a kind of anxiety, because now it's your job to decide who you are, your job to build a life worth living, without clear guidance, without shared ritual, without any promise that you're doing it right. You wake up surrounded by options. You can move cities, change careers, switch beliefs. You can cut ties, reinvent yourself, rewrite your story every year, and still, you feel stuck. Not because you're not free, but because that freedom has no ground beneath it. This is what Fromm called freedom from. Freedom as detachment. You're no longer bound by tradition or obedience, but you're not yet rooted in anything either. And in that in-between space, something strange happens. We don't soar, we drift. We keep our options open, we hesitate to commit. We mistake indecision for empowerment. But deep down, we long for direction. Not control, not dogma, just something steady, something real. Because freedom without meaning isn't freedom, it's noise. And that's the deception. We think we're free because no one's stopping us. But true freedom isn't the absence of resistance. It's the presence of purpose. Until we understand that, we'll keep mistaking movement for depth. We'll chase novelty instead of truth. We'll say we're liberated and still feel lost. Once you were told who you were, by your community, by your religion, by your family name, your gender, your role. And while those roles were often restrictive, they came with structure, with continuity, with a sense of place. But modern life tears all of that down. It tells you that identity is yours to create, that meaning is yours to find, that no one else can define your path. It sounds like empowerment, but for many it feels like pressure, because now the task isn't just to live, It's to build a self from the ground up, to be original, to be clear, to be successful on your own terms, even when those terms are never quite defined. And beneath that task is a quiet, gnawing fear. What if I get it wrong? What if I choose the wrong path, the wrong partner, the wrong dream? What if I wake up 10 years from now and realize I've built a life that looks free but feels hollow? This is the emotional undercurrent that Fromm understood. When the old orders fall away, we don't just become liberated. We become responsible, fully, personally, existentially, and that kind of responsibility can be unbearable. So we compensate. We search for scripts, not official ones, but cultural ones. The purpose-driven life, the high-value individual, the digital nomad, the mindful entrepreneur, the soft life, the hustle grind, the healing era. These identities give us temporary shape, but they don't always give us truth, because they still outsource the hard part. They still ask, what's the version of me that will be admired? Not, what's the version of me that feels whole? And so we drift between selves, each one more polished than the last, each one promising certainties and quietly delivering exhaustion, because defining yourself in isolation is a weight the psyche was never meant to carry alone. We were built for meaning, for shared myths, for rituals that hold us when we're lost. But in this age of ultimate freedom, we are expected to invent it all from scratch and then perform it with confidence. It's no wonder so many people feel like imposters. They're not failing at life. They're suffocating under the pressure to invent one without a map. Real freedom doesn't mean choosing alone. It means choosing with direction, with clarity, with roots that go deeper than trend or trauma. Because when every decision is a statement of identity, freedom stops feeling like openness and starts feeling like a test. It's easy to romanticize choice, to believe that the more options we have, the freer we are. But deep down, we know that isn't true, because choice without clarity becomes torment. Modern freedom promises you can become anything, but it never tells you how to know what matters. And so every decision starts to carry more than just consequence. It carries identity. What should I do with my life? What should I value? What kind of person should I be? These aren't questions we ask once. They live in us, quietly, constantly, like background noise we can't shut off. And they come with fear. Fear of wasting time, fear of missing out, fear of regret, fear that despite all this freedom, we'll still somehow get it wrong. Erich Fromm understood that this fear is not weakness. It's a response to being untethered. When we're no longer anchored by tradition or community, we don't just feel free, we feel exposed. Every yes becomes a kind of gamble. Every no feels like a door we've permanently closed. And the more we try to get it right, the more we become paralyzed by the idea that we could get it wrong. This is why so many people stay busy, not because they're fulfilled, but because motion feels safer than stillness. To stop and really ask, do I want this? Is this mine? Am I building a life I recognize? That takes courage, because it might mean admitting that some of the choices we've made weren't really choices. They were reactions, adaptations, attempts to be seen, approved, safe. This is the quiet fear beneath so much of modern life. That despite all our freedom, we don't really know what we want. And the cost of choosing wrong feels too high to bear. So we stall, we hedge, we scroll through other people's lives, hoping they'll reflect something back to us, something we can trust, something that feels like direction. But no one can answer that question for you. And freedom, real freedom, won't wait forever. It demands you move, not frantically but deliberately, not perfectly but honestly. Because the truth is, every life comes with pain, every path comes with loss, Freedom isn't the absence of that pain. It's the willingness to choose a life that's worth it, not because it's safe, but because it's yours. When freedom becomes too much to carry, we look for places to set it down. Not consciously, not dramatically, but slowly, subtly. We say we want to be free, but what we often want more is to feel certain, to feel safe, to feel like we're doing life right. And so we seek out systems that offer us answers, identities that offer belonging, beliefs that remove the weight of having to decide. Erich Fromm called this the escape from freedom, because when a person is no longer held by tradition or hierarchy, the burden of self-direction can feel unbearable. And so we unconsciously trade one form of control for another, not through force, through comfort. We don't march into totalitarianism, we slide into sameness. We adopt the language of whatever community rewards us. We soften our edges to fit into the culture that surrounds us. We defer to whatever set of ideas gives us structure, even if they're borrowed. And because no one is commanding us, we still feel free. But it's a thinner kind of freedom, the kind that only exists as long as you don't question too much. This is the paradox. We escape rigid authority only to become loyal to trends, ideologies, or social tribes, not because we believe in them completely, but because they give us relief. They tell us who we are. They shrink the field of possibility. They quiet the fear. And so we conform. We adopt the opinions that are safest. We shape ourselves to match the people around us. We repeat the phrases that signal I belong. And in doing so, we trade something essential. Not our freedom, but ourself. Fromm believed that most people aren't fully aware this is happening. They believe they're being authentic. They believe they're choosing. But if your values are built on what's popular, if your beliefs shift based on fear of exclusion, if your sense of self depends on the approval of the group, then what you have isn't freedom, it's adaptation. And adaptation is useful for survival, but it is not the same as becoming. Because real freedom isn't found in avoiding risk. It's found in choosing something even when it's inconvenient, even when it doesn't earn applause, even when it makes you stand alone. Without that willingness, what looks like liberation is just camouflage, a well-dressed conformity, an escape disguised as identity. Modern culture often equates freedom with independence. To be free, we're told, is to need no one, to carry your own weight, to rely on yourself, to ask for nothing. And while there's strength in self-reliance, this story, taken to its extreme, becomes isolating because no one is truly self-made. No one builds a meaningful life in isolation. Erich Fromm believed that real freedom isn't about cutting ties, it's about choosing where you belong. And belonging requires relationship. It requires trust. It requires letting yourself be seen, not as a brand, not as a role, but as a human being. But that kind of vulnerability doesn't fit into the myth of radical independence. So we armor up. We hide our needs behind competence. We equate asking for help with weakness. We keep our distance, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and call it strength. But underneath the polished image is often a quiet hunger, to be met, to be mirrored, to feel, even for a moment, that we are held by something beyond our own willpower. That hunger is not failure, it's not immaturity, it's human. Fromm saw that we fear dependence not because it's bad, but because we confuse it with submission. We think if we need others, we've lost ourselves. But the opposite is true. The more we deny our need for connection, the more fragile we become. Because we're social by design. Freedom, in its fullest form, isn't individualism. It's integration. It's the ability to be yourself and be with others. to stand in your truth without having to do it alone. The myth of independence tells us we'll be free when we have nothing to lose. But freedom isn't the absence of attachment. It's the presence of integrity, even in relationship, even in community, even in love. If your freedom depends on total detachment, what you have isn't strength, it's avoidance. Because real freedom includes the courage to stay, to commit, to let people matter even when it's risky, not because you can't live without them, but because life means more when you don't. So what does real freedom look like if it's not infinite choice, not isolation, not avoidance? Erich Fromm believed that authentic freedom isn't found in escape, but in engagement. It's not the power to drift, it's the courage to root, to choose not just from, but into something. Most of us have been conditioned to think of freedom as motion, as doing what we want, when we want, how we want. But that's not freedom, that's momentum, and momentum isn't meaning. True freedom often looks quieter. It looks like a person who knows what matters to them and lives like it. It looks like someone who isn't pulled in every direction by fear of missing out. Someone who can stay in relationship, in effort, in discomfort, not because they're trapped, but because they've chosen with clarity. Grounded freedom doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need constant reinvention. It doesn't confuse flexibility with purpose. It's less about expressing the self and more about integrating the self. Honoring your desires, your limitations, your values, and your history all at once. And it often asks for things the modern world tells us to avoid: stillness, discipline, responsibility, restraint. Not because those things are restrictive, but because they create the container for real depth. Fromm wrote that freedom is only real when it's paired with something larger than the self: a cause, a relationship, a value system, a willingness to serve, not just to seek. That kind of freedom isn't flashy. It doesn't perform well, it doesn't always feel exciting, but it feels steady, it feels rooted, it feels human. Because in the end, freedom isn't about having endless options. It's about having the strength to choose what matters most and stay with it. Not because you have to, but because you've decided, this is the life I'm willing to live fully. In the end, the question isn't, are you free? It's, what are you doing with your freedom? Because if freedom only means avoiding pain, avoiding commitment, avoiding responsibility, it's not really freedom, it's evasion. Erich Fromm believed that the highest form of freedom isn't found in rebellion or escape or the rejection of authority. It's found in the decision to live authentically, to take your freedom and use it, not just to protect yourself, but to engage fully with life. That kind of freedom requires something that modern life doesn't often cultivate: courage. The courage to stop performing. The courage to choose something real, even if it's hard. The courage to belong, to believe, to care. Because when you choose something with your whole self, a purpose, a person, a principle, you will suffer, you will risk. You will lose parts of the limitless life you could have lived, but you will gain something else: the quiet knowledge that your life is no longer theoretical, it is real. Grounded freedom asks you to live with intention, to carry your choices not as burdens but as acts of meaning, to understand that maturity doesn't come from resisting all authority, but from choosing your own with wisdom. And maybe that's the most radical thing you can do now: to stop chasing a self you haven't met yet, to stop running from uncertainty, to stop believing that freedom means never needing anyone. Because freedom doesn't always feel light. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes it feels like doubt. But if you stay with it, if you choose with care and commit with heart, it starts to feel like something else. Like peace, like depth, like coming home. So if you've been drifting, lost in choice, overwhelmed by independence, unsure what it means to be truly free, this is your reminder. You're not failing, you're just human. And maybe the next chapter of your freedom won't be about escaping life. It will be about entering it.